Todd Akin, who is running for the U.S. Senate this fall in 2012, was being interviewed about his stance on abortion, and he is an anti-abortion candidate. And in the interview, he was asked if he believed in exceptions in cases of pregnancy through rape or incest. And he answered as follows: "It seems to me, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare, that being pregnancy from rape. If it's legitimate rape, the female body has ways to shut that whole thing down." So what he's saying is, he thinks that if a woman is raped, then like the body just magically has a way to just by itself, with no outside intervention, prevent an egg from being fertilized. That is such egregious ignorance of the workings of the human body, and understanding the plight of victims of sexual abuse, that this goes beyond being pro-choice or pro-life or pro or anti-abortion. It goes beyond that. It just comes to a basic lack of empathy and understanding and knowledge about just human rights and human dignity and the human body. I mean, does this guy think that, like, oh, if you get cut and have massive blood loss, that you could just recover from that by drinking red paint and to restore the blood? Because that's the level of total ignorance of how the human body's systems work that's being demonstrated here. And I absolutely hate thinking in absolutes about groups of people. And I know that all conservatives don't believe what the sort of things that Todd Akin has said about rape victims. I know it's not a Christian thing. I know all Christians don't believe that, and I know all Republicans don't believe that. But when it comes to the conservative spectrum in the U.S. right now, there's so much tolerance for extreme points of view in regards to women's rights and women's advocacy and perceptions about rape cases and sexual abuse, that there's so much tolerance for extreme opinions. There's so much tolerance for that when something that it fertilizes the whole society, so that something even more extreme, because what Todd Akin said is so extreme and shocking that even other Republicans and other conservatives have hammered down on him, saying that this is unacceptable, this is outrageous what you're saying. But because there's so much tolerance for less extreme things of this nature along these lines, that now that this guy is going to the next level beyond that. And when you hold extreme positions, it fertilizes the ground for even more extremes to work their way into society, and it's leading to absolute disaster it's just leading to absolute disaster. There's no other way I could put it. And this coincides with a general trend I see in the minimalization of the struggles and the realities of rape and of sexual abuse, and of things of that nature. And one thing I see that really irks me is on televised news, on cable, and on broadcast TV, or on major news sites. On major news sites, over the last few years, I've seen major news sites report about horrendous sexual abuse or human rights violations in other parts of the world. I've seen news sites report on a horrendous story in somewhere in the Middle East, where a woman was forced to have sexual intercourse with a dog as part of a marriage ritual. I've read cases in the Middle East, a very recent one, for instance, though there have been many similar ones like it, where a woman was raped and then legally obligated to marry her rapist, and then after that she committed suicide because the continued abuse was so unbearable. There's a case in Dubai in the UAE where a young man was kidnapped and raped by three men, and when the victim went to the police, he was charged with a crime and sentenced to hard labor. And he was visiting his father. He was a citizen of France, and the French government basically had to come and snatch him out of the country before he was put into hard labor as consequence for him going forward and saying that he was raped. And what I see is and at least in the U.S. media, or the U.S. culture, they'll look at cases like that out of the Middle East or out of Africa and say, oh, look at those horrendous women's rights violations, or those horrendous violations of victims' rights, and say, oh, like the U.S., we've come so much further than that. We're so liberal and progressive, and women are safe here, and we respect and protect, all our citizens. But I mean, when it comes to a lot of the extreme rhetoric and hate that has been directed at women recently in the country, that it's basically gotten to the point where we've basically come to do everything except for the cases that I've described, that those shocking stories out of, for instance, the Middle East and Northern Africa. But it's gotten to the point where we're doing almost everything but those things. But the worst part is that those things do happen in the United States too. I mean, but it's not covered in the same way. It's not, far enough that we could point and gawk at, oh, those horrible, backward countries where women are disrespected and sex abuse victims, are persecuted by the law. I mean, there is, when it's a case in the U.S. where, for instance, but when it comes to, for instance, some case somewhere in the Bible Belt where a woman is raped or coerced into sex and then gets shamed and punished by the community for something that a man did to her, then it's not held to the same level of abject horror. It's not pointed and gawked at and dwelled over, I don't think, in the same way as a similar case would be in the Middle East. Or when it's some milquetoast, middle-class, white suburban family where, an abusive husband, their wife or a child into sexual activity with an animal, then that's not, pointed or gawked at or held to the same level of abject horror and say, oh, look at them. When cases like that, which do happen in America, do get reported, they'll often skim over the details. And I understand to a certain extent that's sort of to protect the victims, but it's sort of like if something like this happened in the Middle East, where a woman was forced to have sex with a dog as part of a marriage ritual, where they'll just explicitly report that. But in the U.S., when something horrendous like that happens with an abusive husband and his wife, or a pedophile and a child, then they'll just say, oh, it was sexually abuse, or oh, it was rape. It's like it's just minimized. There was a case, for instance, in the U.S. where a woman was arrested for sexually abusing a helpless male victim, yet the male in that case were also described in court papers of having committed rape by the sheriff's department, because, like, oh, he had an erection, that means he's equally responsible. So there's this culture of denial. There's this culture of denial and minimalization and projection, and that of sex abuse cases and of the plight of the victims of these crimes, that's continuing to happen in America, and it's letting people get away with horrendous crimes, and it's creating a situation where people, and the thing is, going back to what Todd Akin said in the interview, that's not something unique to him. I've heard people say that. People have said that in discussion to me, like, oh, if she was really raped, then God wouldn't have let her get pregnant. if she, I've heard people say that exactly like what Tatiana said, like, oh, if she was really raped, then it wouldn't have been possible for her to get pregnant, or God wouldn't have allowed her to get pregnant. How could you believe that there is a force of good and a force of evil and an almighty God on the side of the force of good, and then believe that women who become pregnant because of sexual assaults are, oh, well, if it wasn't real sexual assault because God didn't prevent her from being pregnant, so that must mean she's guilty. That's the line of logic that leads into. And the thing is, the really scary thing is, this isn't some random idiot. This guy is, I believe, he's currently in the House of Representatives. He's currently running for Senate, and he says he's been asked to resign from his campaign over this. He's said he's not going to resign over this. And these aren't stupid. Stupid people believe this, but these people aren't just, oh, they're stupid. These are, he says he heard this from a doctor. For all I know, he really could have heard this from a doctor, because people believe this, and they honestly think this, and they're learned people. One of the people I heard say that to me about, oh, God wouldn't have let them get pregnant if it was a real rape, that person was a peer of mine, a young person in college. And so this nonsense about, oh, college students are all just brainwashed liberals, and that's BS, because learned people, intelligent people, people who know what they're talking about, who aren't crazy, believe this, and they become doctors, and they become lawyers and police officers and judges who are people who are victimized by these things turn to, and who knows if they're being fairly treated and protected with people like this out there. And it's absolutely outrageous. It completely transcends, oh, if you're pro or anti-abortion. It completely transcends that. It's about basic human dignity. And because of these extremist positions regarding these issues, they're currently being fostered in the conservative sphere of the U.S. political spectrum. Things are just deteriorating in that department, and it's not acceptable, and we can't let it go on. That's all I have to say, and thank you very much for watching.